for the heroes. You know, so it's like things like that show you that, like, the way that they balance things was totally different. The Nurgle, the Mark of Nurgle actually did different things. So on chariots, they gave them fear. On their regiments, it gave them fear. But on the heroes, it was additional wounds and fear.
Mm.
It's almost as if what you're upgrading matters, and it should be taken into account.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of just picking a blanket statistic and just saying, like, your obliterators of Slanesh now have +1 initiative. Oh,
Mm.
goody.
Like, this
Absolutely.
is Ori. I think that's pretty cool. Go to throw back to when we didn't have any, so they made them themselves. That's pretty cool. I like that.
I think that it does two things. It shows the degradation of rules over time, as well as justifying why there should be, in my mind, marks, as opposed to not having marks. Because it's like, well, the mark of, like, having chaos undecided, you don't get a mark, you don't get any boost or buff. But on the other hand, you now have a lot more points you can spend on the rest of your army. Or you can mix and match and take a whole bunch of different units.
Yeah, well, that layer of rules really is what allows you to characterize your warband versus another's, right? Like, it's that personal kind of flourish that it's like your signature as a general or as a list builder. You know what I mean?
Although it does become quite weird though when Chaos, by like 4th edition, like literally within 2 years of this book, Chaos has become essentially all the legions. Their only difference for like Night Lords versus Word Bearers is the color that you've chosen to paint them.
Yeah, well, that's a
Pressing as
decline.
fuck.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's certainly a decline of rules and the creative freedom you'd hope that you'd. I think that makes the hobby so satisfying.
When you engender your entire game to revolve around tournaments, what you get? You can't have marks. You can't have green stuff models. You can't have, 'cause people will complain.
But they won't even add in like those lovely pictures and banners for you to paint, where it's like, photocopy this, print it out on some paper, paint it, coat it in layers of PVA until it goes hard, and
That procures no advantage at a competitive tournament. That's what the game's balanced around. That's what the game's focused on.
I included that little.
Fluffy people,
I included that little page of the Chaos runes because, like, that just seems like a pointless, like, just fluff thing. But it's like that's world building, and it's like it's convincing you, like, hey, I could paint these runes onto my miniatures, like onto their banner, onto their armor.
Yeah, that's it. They're
nice,
built
simple
to paint
shapes.
Armor. Yeah, definitely.
And
I mean, I did this in the old Warriors of Chaos Codex as well for fantasy. And you can make your own, literally the name of your guy. They said, if you want to make a name of a guy, here's what some cool words mean in the Black Tongue. So, cool.
Yeah, it's in there in those pictures I sent.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and
Along
bring
with,
up the photos as we talk about them.
Here it is, yeah.
Well, I put them in there so you have them available.
Oh, it's a great resource.
Yeah, like, you've got those Despoilers of the North, so you've got those lovely pictures of, like, the Bloodthirster and the Keeper of Secrets dueling. They're all white metal. This is way before Finecast. This is like 5-6 years before Finecast. It's like people converted. They cared.
I think there are still like a grouping of like a certain population of the hobby of people in the hobby that are still passionate, that will do conversions and put their creative spin on their armies. I think that hasn't gone away. It's not in 100%. I was just about to get there. Yeah, it's not encouraged though. Is the issue, right? It's like leading by example. This kind of idea that you would prefer. I would prefer. I think we'd all prefer Games Workshop to do in their publications, right? To lead the way, to show the potential, to set the creative embers, to get them going, right?
When I see old armies like that, it just makes me want to buy, build, and paint an old army like that. I can't help it. It gets my creative juices flowing.
Absolutely. Well, I guess that. Sorry?
Yeah. No, we're good.
I was just gonna say, I think that serves well enough for an opener of sorts for this recording. I was recording a little bit. I didn't think you guys would mind a cold open, as they say in the biz. So welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Grimdark Therapy. I'm joined by the usual compatriots, Maka of the Outer Circle and North of Northern Exile. Links to their channels are in the description. And as you guys may have intuited, the topic I sort of suggested for this week was a fairly large umbrella of a topic that was initially poised as, is it in poor taste to elevate the god-marked legions over, the non-specified god-marked Chaos Space Marine legions? Because there seems to me to be a bit of favoritism in what has come to pass, let's say. And like I said, this is a wide umbrella of a topic. You could talk about rules, you could talk about product and model ranges, you could talk about just lore and the implications of everything, or perceptions of faction identity, right? So, I don't really have a path or an avenue in which one of these areas I wanted to hone in on here. I just kind of wanted to offer up what I thought was an interesting paradigm, like where we find ourselves in how the Chaos Space Marine legions are characterized and how they sit presently.
It is interesting. I think you're right. As a blanket opening statement, I think you're right in that they do get the short end of the stick. Your Night Lords, your Iron Warriors. But on the flip side, I think there is an easy way out of this. Not that the Games Workshop will ever take it. In that you make their war bands, like the actual war bands of Chaos Space Marines should look like a mixture of Night Lords, Iron Warriors, all the people who aren't one of the big four, right? That's what you should do. Bring out warband rules that are really powerful, that are only for Night Lords and Iron Warriors and people who aren't, they are Chaos Undivided rather than one of the big ones. Word bearers, that's a big problem actually, and I think Mac will touch on that later because he's more of a Horus Heresy person. But the power of the word bearers in the setting is astronomical. They're still a united legion, literally. You've got 200,000 Space Marines. That's only grown because of the Demonculabras and all the other things going on. And they haven't really been fighting. Every now and again, one of their sorcerer lords will go out there and do something, like in the old Space Marine game and things. Apart from that, they've not really been seen. So, beyond near full strength, and that is something that, in lore, again, Maka will touch on the mechanics aspect of this, but in lore, Games Workshop have a lot of these tools in their back pocket that they could just pull out at any time and say, okay, this is a big bad now, So the potential is there in the old Renegade Marines, if you want to call them that, the old war bands. You can see it in the Night Lords trilogy, right? Whenever the more chaos stuff comes up in that, they reject it. And it's annoying to them. It's annoying to the reader, actually. You're like, oh, for God's sake, because all they ever do is screw things up. There is a Khorne affiliated Night Lord, and all he ever does in those books is screw things up for everybody else by just being too angry all the time, not doing tactical plays. So you get exacerbated with it. You're sick of chaos by the end of it. You're like, no, I want my boys. That's the feel. That should be the feel of Chaos Space Marines. It shouldn't be. When I say this, I mean ones who aren't affiliated with any of the gods. It should be, these are my boys, these are my brothers, right? And that's who I fight for. Don't fight for the Imperium. Don't fight for Chaos, right? I fight for my boys. It should be the same feeling as towards the end of Metal Gear Solid 5 when your army is out of your control and it's kind of evil, but you are just fighting for each other, right? That kind of a thing. Yeah. Should be that kind of a thing. Your mercs to the end. You know, the coolest warbands I've seen people make are ones who are, yes, you know, there are a few Chaos worshippers in there. Yes, they're all heretics because they don't follow the Emperor. But if you pay them, and you're an Imperial world, they'll go, yeah, fuck it, we'll fight for you. Fine. We don't care. Chaos. We're trying to survive. You know, we don't have the favour of the Chaos Gods. We don't want it. So, give us war material, and we'll fight for you for a while. You know, that's some cool shit. If they lean into that, sorry, we're too early, can't swear. But if they lean into that, then I think there is a gold mine there. They never will, because they're not brave enough to do so. And it's not called Ultramarine.
I think I lost you there for a second, North.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there is the massive potential there. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay. There is massive potential there to a gold mine for Games Workshop to go in on and to pull out and say, look, these guys are cool, right? They're not worshipping chaos, but they're there. And you can. They won't do that because it's a very brave thing to do. It would take work, much, but you know, some work, and it's not called Rebute Gilliman or the Ultramarines. They'll never touch on it. I don't know what Maka thinks in terms of mechanics, you know, in terms of the game, how things will go that way, or if there's other biased looks. But yeah, in lore, I think that's how it looks.
Oh, oh, go ahead, Maka.
No, you go first, mate. I'm still getting my thoughts together on
Oh,
that.
fair enough. Yeah. So, yeah, I agree with what you're laying out there, North, in terms of the lore and the disposition of the Chaos Space Marine legions that aren't, godbound, let's say, right? The Night Lords, Iron Warriors, etc. I mean, I guess Word Bearers are godbound, but in a different way than the god-specific, you know, when I say the god-specific legions, we're talking about World Eaters, Thousand Sons, Death Guard, Emperor's Children, right? The big four that Games Workshop has kind of... they're in the process of kind of elevating them above Chaos Space Marines in 40k, and in Age of Sigmar, they're kind of elevated in a similar sort of template, right? But in 40k, it's just weird to me because it certainly feels like you know, the God-marked Legionnaires, the Khorne Berserkers, Rubric Marines, Plague Marines, and Noise Marines were always sort of poised as elite. They're better than Chaos. I think they were Force-orged as elite because they're better than your standard Chaos Space Marines, right? And those legions wouldn't have standard Chaos Space Marines. Their standard guys were the Iron Warriors elite choices, right? And so that hits like a kind of moral intuition for me where I'm like, I don't like that. But I'll acknowledge there's like a line, obviously. You want...
I can shed a little light on that, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, we need to take a dive back into the days of the past. Just close your eyes and imagine you're a bright-eyed, optimistic young lad or lass in Games Workshop. So, back in the days of like 3.5 edition 40k, what you're looking at really in your Chaos Space Marines is more your Chaos Renegades. So think like your Red Corsairs sort of level dudes, Fallen Chapters, that kind of stuff that have just been absorbed into Chaos. Not necessarily the Legionnaires. Your Chosen, or something roughly around Chosen, represents your actual legions. Like level of troops, guys who are very experienced. They're probably from the Great Crusade era, were in the Horus Heresy, and that's why they're the elite of Chaos. And the Chosen are in that elite slot alongside your Noise Marines, your Thousand Sons, your Khorne Berserkers, and your Emperor's Children Noise Marines, right?
I like that layout.
So that's why they're there.
Yeah, that works nicely, right? Everyone feels at parity.
Yes, and giving the marks of the gods to the units show that they had the favoritism of the gods, but didn't bring them up to the level of the Legionnaire. Now, this shifted from about 4th-ish edition, we'll say, give or take, into the Chosen just being the champions, which is a very nebulous term, and by 6th edition, you could buy Veterans of the Long War, which was an upgrade for all of your... basically everyone in the army. If you didn't give them a mark of like Chaos, or even if you did, you give them Veterans of the Long War, which meant that it was supposed to say that, oh, you were there during the Great Crusade, it gave you +1 leadership. But But when we talk rules, this had some major ramifications. So, in 6th edition, a Chaos Space Marine, a basic stock Marine, was 1 point cheaper than a Loyalist Space Marine for basically identical loadouts. And you gave them Veterans of the Long War, you were actually 1 point of leadership higher than a regular Space Marine. But you were now the same points per model. But here's where the problems begin, because regular Space Marine chapters got combat tactics, chapter tactics, and they shall know no fear. Now, for those playing at home who don't remember, and they shall know no fear meant that you could never be run down in close combat for failing a leadership check. Chaos did not have this. So in a 1v1 fight, if Chaos lost the fight and fled, they could be run down, but Marines for some reason couldn't, even though they're both Marines in the same armor with the same training, you know, and yours could be Veterans of the Long War. They were literally 10,000 year veterans who, you know, dueled in eye shot of the Primarchs and the Emperor themselves. Doesn't matter. Doesn't mean shit. And along with that, combat tactics allowed you to take a 10-man tactical squad and go, geez, this mission has more objectives than kill points. All right, cool. I'm going to split my squads in two. Now I have twice the scoring units. That was just a free thing you had. And your chapter tactics gave you an additional bonus based on whichever chapter you had. So Ultramarines got a bonus that gave them, like, I don't know, I think it was rerolls to shoot or something like that, or rerolls of in like a phase of your choice. And Iron Hands had like feel no pain, this kind of stuff. Chaos got none of that. So Chaos not only had none of the perks of being like Chaos, but they also got none of the perks of being chapters either. Even the guys like Red Corsairs who had come from chapters, like, what, you forgot how to split into 5-man squads? Like, work with me here, you know? And so the rules we have now are very much a carryover of that time period, where through 6th into 7th and into 8th, and it's like, oh, Gilliman created the Primaris Marines of Belisarius Call as a response to the threat of Chaos. Like, really? Because I'm not seeing that threat personally. Marines were always better as Loyalists than Chaos. Chaos was just being strictly a downgrade. And all that the Chaos Marks did was it said that you had the favoritism of a god, and that favoritism was supposed to be a trade-off. Like, you went up in points and you got a buff of some description for it, but now you were really sort of leaning in that direction, and of course you've traded points away for it. And in the pictures that I shared with you earlier this week when you suggested the topic, you see that that was dramatically different in earlier editions of 40k, and especially Warhammer Fantasy Battles, where they adjusted the cost of that gift based on the unit that was purchasing it. So a unit like a Demon Prince, for example, is going to get an awful lot more out of being a powerful spellcaster than, say, a basic infantry soldier might. Therefore, the points is skewed very heavily that way. Conversely, if it's giving, say, the Frenzy special rule, that means something to a Demon Prince, but when you put that on a unit, let's say a regiment of 40 Chaos Warriors, that's a huge upgrade. So you paid more points on the Warriors in that instance. And the rules, therefore, naturally allowed the points to sort of sit where they should. And, of course, the beauty of that system was, okay, yes, you can give your big block of infantry, 20 Chaos Warriors Frenzy, let's say, but you're going to pay a lot of points for that. So now, yes, you've become amazing close combat specialists, but now you've got the negative boons of Frenzy. You must go towards the nearest enemy. You must attempt to charge them if you can. You must swing in close combat. And this now means that they're now good at that one job, and you've paid a lot of points for them to do that, which means if they fail in that job now, it hurts you extra hard. So you go up against a dwarf gun line, and the Thunderers all come out, and the Grudge Throwers, and they just massacre your regiment before it got there. It doubly hurts. And that was the idea of the marks. They were a trade-off. You were basically going all in on black at the casino, right?
Right.
And if it came up red, you were screwed. And Chaos in 40k especially, and to some extent Age of Sigmar, has really pivoted away from that to just being, oh yeah, well you're just now a Chaos Space Marine as a Khorne Berserker, but now you're just better in close combat than a Chaos Space Marine. It's just a strict upgrade. It's okay, cool. Does this have like any other ramifications? Is it like points adjusted based on the character or you? No, 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 no. It's just you're just Khorne now. You've got a book.
No, it won't
Yay.
be. It won't be points adjusted, just because of how everything is laid out, and it's its own army now, right? So your world
Correct.
leaders will be, well, even the performance outcomes that everyone gets all hyped over is adjusted for the outcome that they want, right? The 45, 55. You know, those charts. We've all seen those charts, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that really bums me out because I despise. I hate disparity between loyalist and chaos to begin with, especially when it's so blatant, right? And yes, like I think it's no secret how far back this you can follow this breadcrumb trail, right? But like back then, do you suppose that initial disparity was just born out of favoritism between like writers writing for, this is what I play, so I want them to be good. Like there didn't seem to be an objective not acknowledgement of like standards and relative standards.
I remember the writers who wrote many of these things and the articles they wrote on their works in White Dwarf or in interviews that they did, because at one point in time that was very, I'll say, semi-transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Like they would sit down when they release a new codex and have multi-page article in White Dwarf just talking with them about their design philosophy behind it. Alessio Cavator did a brilliant one for the 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles book that a lot of the pictures I sent you came from. And in that, he basically describes it, like his design process. And unfortunately, Chaos by 4th edition basically lost this. Chaos is not the only force that suffered from this. Tyrannid suffered from this. Whereas other factions got people who tended to love them. Like, you put Phil Kelly in charge of Eldar, Phil Kelly as being like a lifelong Eldar collector, all of a sudden, everyone they look at, they can kick the dick off with just a fucking glance. You go, wow, what a coinky dink, right?
Yeah.
But, like, to a degree that's there, you've also got things like, obviously, 3.5 Chaos was a really, really powerful codex in 40k, and a lot of people complained about it because they complained about it in a vacuum, and so they were never allowed to have their toys ever again after that. They wanted to move away from Chaos Space Marines, and they clearly wanted to head in the direction of Chaos Undecided, where it was treated as more just renegade chapters than renegade legions. And they started putting out an awful lot of fluff at this time to say how the legions were broken up into just war bands and how they're all disorganized and nothing is, blah, 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 blah. But the problem I've always had with it is that I feel Chaos Space Marines should be a clear tier better than Loyalist Space Marines in a straight up fight.
100%.
Maybe they shouldn't have the cohesion in tactics. But if I'm going into like a fist fight, like, power sword to power sword type thing, a Chaos Space Marine should just win, hands down, because he's got the experience factor. And if you've also got a mark in addition to that, then you should be even better again. And some legions, like the Thousand Suns, should be on par with the Grey Knights for strength. Just in raw power, maybe not the discipline to control that power. I think there's a clear distinction there. And the Grey Knights, obviously, their bread and butter is studying their enemies and learning their weaknesses, whereas the Thousand Suns are just more studying sorcery. And they're almost polar opposites in a way. They make great antithesis to one another.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you come across like Araman in the novels, if I can if I can just fanboy out for a bit. And one particular novel, Araman is attacked by a group of Harlequins. He's conducting a ritual in one of his sanctums, and the walls are just lined with Thousand Suns warriors. They just stand there as statues because they're basically inanimate suits of armor, right? And he's just walking around in his just everyday robes, and the Eldar, or the captive, who's looking at him is just watching him, just like fascinated. Like Araman's like clearly aged, but he still has like this olive skin. He still has all this Astartes musculature, but he's got grey hair on his chest, and he's got crow's feet around the eyes. Like, he has aged in the 10,000 years. And when the Harlequins attack, we all know how dangerous Harlequins are in the fluff. Araman calls his armor to him like Iron Man, and armor is just flying onto his body telepathically, while a force field of his own psychic energy is protecting him from a death jester who is attacking him, right? And then all the Thousand Suns that are just like statues around the room just all sort of come to life and just start hosing the Eldar with inferno bolts. And Araman's just there, like, throwing sorceress bolts while his armor is clipping itself onto him. It's like, that is what you tell me Marnius Calgar is going to fight him and win?
Yeah, no, I feel what you're putting down.
You would just pick him up and just flick him into the atmosphere. Just like, well, that was that.
Yeah, admittedly, it's cool. it's pretty cool.
Like, so for your loyalists though, this isn't to say, because people, like, when you point out these power disparities, and you say, like, if Khan the Betrayer comes across, I don't know, let's say Lysander, Darnath Lysander of the Imperial Fist. Mm-hmm. Lysander is losing, right?
You would expect,
but on the tabletop, polar opposite effect, right? Like, no, Cardi's going down to Lysander because he's got a storm shield and he can tank it. But in the fluff, right, Khan would easily hands down beat him. And nobody would have a problem with this. And Marine players will get butthurt and go, well, how can Marines ever win then? You go, because you have better tactics and strategy and coordination of your forces. So Lysander shouldn't be dumb enough to get himself into a position where he's stuck mano a mano in Khan with no assistance.
Yeah, that makes...
That's the trick with loyalists. You can... And this is where the way Mark's work is turned on its head. Because you go, okay, Khan is a berserker. He does not know what is going on around him. He's in a battle rage. We can exploit that. It is a weakness now, not a strength. Right? Because he's not thinking logically. He can walk into an ambush. He'll walk into an area full of mines and claymores, not even realizing it. That's a weakness that a loyalist can exploit. Conversely, an Iron Warrior is going to play a very different game. They're going to be very cold, very calculating. You're probably never going to see them until the bolt gun rounds start hitting you. And so it's a different dynamic to what the marked Chaos forces might be. Emperor's Children, they might get so caught up in the slaughter and the culling and the blood madness and the happiness and the pleasure they're deriving from the situation that they now leave themselves exposed to having their supply lines cut off or being trapped in an ambush. There are so many ways you can look at it with Chaos. And that's the fine points that get missed when writing a codex. Like, the translation from fluff to tabletop has just markedly declined since 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy and 3.5 Chaos, because they lose sight that that's what they're trying to portray. And in trying to quote-unquote tighten up the rules for tournament play, all they end up doing is making Chaos more and more and more vanilla. And instead of showing Marines have a tactical edge in the battle, they just make Marines better. So I know it was really long-winded, and I apologise to both of you for taking.
No, it's not an issue. I mean, I think it's enjoyable content. The way you take us back through memory lane and all that. Yeah, I don't necessarily. Well, I was gonna push back a little bit on this whole idea that for tournament play, Marines are just better. I think there's probably some wiggle room there, but maybe presently it is the pay. I think actually it might be the case presently. Though
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Like, if we're looking at tournament, this is what we're doing here with this video is we're treating the symptom without looking at the cause. The cause is that the game has moved away from, and it's always been moving away from, people who want to tell stories on tabletop. It's always gradually been going from there. This is what I say to people all the time. They say, well, 8th edition, this tournament gaming thing started. No, it didn't. It was coming in increments for a long time. Every single edition would get gradually more complex and gradually more swingy. Usually it was because Games Workshop wanted to sell the latest thing rather than doing anything else. But now we've seen the end of that cycle where we're now in a game where is literally it's an esport basically. If you want to play 40k, it's basically an esport. So fluffy things like the Traitor Marines, as in mixed war bands of Traitor Marines, like Night Lords in the trilogy, things like that. The Black Legion novel, the start of the Black Legion novels, there's no Black Legion. Those are Chaos Warbands, and they're not wholly evil. They're not like going in there killing their own slaves, twirling their moustaches. They're just dudes, lost, and need something to do. Like, that's literally who they are, And it's really interesting to explore these underdogs. That's what they are now. They lost, and they're off in the fringes, and they're like, well, what do we do now? They're like we've got nothing to do, so let's just play amongst each other, I guess, or take jobs from anyone who will give us jobs. I find that more interesting. I think character conflict isn't something that's really in 40k anymore. It's something that George Martin said back in the day, and even though he doesn't really get an opinion now because he doesn't write books, but he said there's nothing more interesting to write about than the human heart in conflict with itself. Everything else is just secondary. I agree with that. When 40k and even 30k is at its best, is when you're actually exploring who Space Marines are. Why are they doing what they do? In a game like 40k now, that's useless. There's no point in doing that because that's not what the game's about. That's not the focus. The focus isn't about the motivations of Ahriman are, right? And there's a very good reason why he's not turned up in a long time. He's a very cerebral character. You can't have Ahriman in your story without thinking about what his motivations are and why he's doing what he's doing. They don't want that. They want Saturday morning cartoon, Born of Fire novels. They want that. The bog standard. So, in terms of whether we're actually going to see a Chaos Warband Codex or even a supplement or a part of the Chaos Space Marine Codex in 11th edition that has, full rules for these dudes in it, they may pay it lip service, but it's not going to get any airtime, in my opinion. Just a lot of things going to happen.
Well, yeah.
No,
if history's anything to go by, certainly not, right? Like
it's a real shame, isn't it? Because when you look at, you could so easily see some brilliant campaigns and threats for 40k, like a Wordbearer's Dark Crusade, or the creation of a Luft Huron, incursion or new empire around the Maelstrom. They're excellent threats. Luft Huron is actually a perfect character for a resculpt and a reimagining, because you could pull some of those like units from Primaris over to Chaos, for example. You could write fun narrative rules in there about, almost like how orcs used to have like looted marine vehicles. You could do the same sort of thing, like Chaos looted marine vehicles.
Yeah, I think it's low-hanging fruit, right? But that's
such an easy thing.
That's a line I don't think Games Workshop wants to cross. They're super afraid about mixing units for, like, I'm surprised there's even rules for like brood brothers for Genestealer cults. You know what I mean? Like taking products from different factions and using it for another faction. They don't like to do much of that, I feel, even though there's so much opportunity, right?
You could have Fabius Bile is another one who you can do a fantastic campaign around. Like, he's cracked the code. He's now making super Chaos Space Marines, a race against time for the Loyalists to shut him down. This planet that he set up his Clono-matic 5000 lab on, making super Marines. No. Okay. It very much is a symptom of 40k being dumbed down to a game that at this point is barely one step above like a Risk. Like, just don't even paint your models. Just mold them in a color plastic that they're supposed to represent. This is blue army, this is green army, choose your poison. It's barely a step above that. The whole point of Marks was as a way of expressing your faction and in a way your personality at the time when you're playing that faction, and going all in on one particular play style. With Khorne, it used to be hitting like a freight train. With Slaanesh, it used to be about hitting them faster than they could hit you. With Nurgle, it was about outlasting them. And with Tzeentch, it was about, psychers and that ability to pin them down with your multi-wound, 1,000 Suns infantry, while your sorcerers got to work turning enemies into Chaos Spawn. That was a power for a long time, and it was hell fun. And they've moved away from that. They've actively moved away from that, where now when they've created the codexes for, I don't know whether to call them codexes or indexes or what anymore.
They still call them codexes.
Yeah, but it feels like it varies every 5 minutes because they do some chapter-approved type update in Warhammer community. But anyway, I digress. When they move away from that to, you now have this fixed selection. This is now what you can take in a 1,000 Suns army. This is now 1,000 Suns. You're not creating a 1,000 Suns force. You're being confined to a box, which has a particular set of toys. It's like you have Zangors, you have 1,000. There's no more. Let's take some basic Chaos Warriors. Let's take some regular cultists. Let's take some of this, some of that, and doing a bit of mix and match. Like maybe I don't need everyone in the army to be marked as Tzeentch because, hey, the Tzeentch army likes to use pawns, right? So maybe I could save a few points on not putting marks on all the Chaos Warriors because they're just some other Chaos Warband maybe that's just been roped into this by a treacherous Tzeentch Lord. And that's gone. That's lost. There's none of that. That's adventurous. That's creating something with your army. We don't do that anymore.
Oh, I feel what you're saying. Yeah. So in limiting the range of options that are eligible, you basically really, tie your one hand behind the hobbyist's back in terms of their creative expression. Is what it comes down to, which makes sense, right? If you have less options, you're gonna basically everyone's gonna have the same 1,000 Suns army, right?
Conversely, they don't force the same limitations on Loyalist chapters. Loyalist chapters all feel some level of unique to one another, but they fundamentally have access to the same tools to get the job done.
For the most part, right? There's a few outliers, but I feel what you're saying.
Always outliers, like Templars with neophytes, that sort of thing. Like I'm aware these things exist, but on the whole,
on the whole, they all share that same roster of Primaris or modern Space Marines.
You don't just pick up Ultramarines and all of a sudden Vindicators are off the table.
Yes, that is uniquely a Chaos problem, and that's another. It's not marks, but it's related to it's the same. It's tied to the same root problem as our marks discussion, right? It's like I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know why the Emperor's Children, brand new, first time getting a codex for the Emperor's Children, and there's no Hellbrutes. There's no Hellbrutes in there. There's no Predator in there.
Noise Dreadnought is just such a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
But then again, look at Khorne. At least the Emperor's Children have more than 3 units in their book.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's... I noticed that as well. The bar for satisfaction, right?
Isn't that a sign/symptom right there of that issue, though? Like, if you play Khorne now, you are so one-dimensional. You have Berserkers, you have Possessed Berserkers, you have Berserker Lord on Demon Rhino, you have Cultist Berserkers, and you have Angron and Khan. There you go. That's it.
Yeah, those are your unique signature things you get to flex. And then if you want to not play World Eaters, but play a homebrew custom warband of renegades that are fully allied to Khorne, you have one detachment to play in Chaos Space Marines, and it actually punishes you for not multi-marking for list crunch purposes.
Like, what happens to your Khorne bikes?
Oh, they
they
immediately stop working.
What happens to your crazed Khorne affiliated Hell Turkey? Khorne Dreadnoughts used to be one of the most fun things. It's like, hey, you remember how Chaos Dreadnoughts are all insane? Yeah, we gave one the mark of Khorne. Guess what he specializes in? That was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Khorne, another one who Blood Slaughterer over at Forge World, asking, just screaming
Oh, yeah.
for a plastic kit. Would have been a perfect fit because it's like it's not just a dreadnought. You're not going to get it confused with the Loyalist Space Marines. It would have been such a unique touch for them, and it would have given some more identity to them. No, 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 no. You've got chain axes. That's enough for you. You go away now. The Primaris Marines haven't had a release, so we've got to give them 5 more to make up for your 1.
Yeah.
No, I don't disagree. It's
No, it's just it's stripping away of options that I would go against. You know, I don't see why everybody can't have the cake and eat it. There's no reason why not. There is literally no reason why you should make less things called Games Workshop. Make more things. Why can't you have a supplement or a big bit of the Chaos Space Marine Codex that is, what if you're not one of these 4 assholes? What if you want to be somebody who isn't taking it in the ass from the Chaos Gods, or one in particular? And what if you know, Word Bearers are here if you want the full gangbang experience of all of them at once. But there's also Night Lords here. There's also Iron Warriors here who don't like the Chaos Gods and don't follow them for any particular reason. That they're selfish. They're a band of brothers. They're mercenaries. Is what they do. Renegade chapters should be in the Chaos Space Marine Codex. You know, how to do Renegade Space Marine chapters, how to convert your Primaris Marines to look more edgy, to look more like they've got run-down armor, like they're patching it together from different marks. That would be cool. There is a whole ocean of untapped knowledge and potential here that Games Workshop will never, ever touch.
Are you familiar with Lord of the Rings factions rules?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I am not. So maybe for the audience and myself, you could just give a summary.
So if you pick a faction, let's say Minas Tirith, if you make a force that's entirely Minas Tirith, you get a bonus because you've not just min-maxed by picking the best stuff from other forces in Middle-earth, and garnished your army with that. And if you take historical allies, you do not lose this bonus. So, for example, if you have a Gondor and Rohan army themed to fight at the Black Gates, perfectly acceptable, okay? And the game will reward you for picking a narratively satisfying choice of units. In 40k of old, you could take Slaanesh and take a Slaanesh marked Obliterator squad. +1 initiative. Going to do absolutely nothing for an initiative 2 unit designed only to ever shoot at enemies, and when enemies getting close, they're swinging power fists anyway. So what does +1 initiative mean, right? But at least it was marked for Slaanesh, and Chaos players in ye olde days would often take that mark, even though it was useless, for the sake of the theme of the army they were building.
Oh yeah, well that's the mark of integrity.
That has now been taken away from us. But they could easily put a rule like that back in and just say, like, hey, you're taking Emperor's Children, you can take Obliterators in your army, or you can take Possessed, and if you mark them as Slaaneshi, then you unlock something for your army. Something gets better about running this force because it's a homogenous force themed to that god. You know?
Yeah, well, now that issue
is not important.
That design space is basically, it's been cut from the meat, because now it's its own army, right? Slaanesh, Emperor's Children aren't Chaos Space Marines. They're in a separate category. They have their own codex, right? Rather than what would the example be? Like Dark Angels, where they have a supplement to the Codex of Space Marines, right? So they don't have that option because the older, like even in 8th edition, where Chaos Space Marines were, World Eaters were in there, and Emperor's Children were in there, because they didn't exist as they do now. They had those kinds of rules you're talking about, right? Like, you can, all units, if you're playing World Eaters subfaction, you have to all be marked Khorne, right? Do you hear? Okay, so maybe this is unrelated, or sidebar perhaps. Do you suppose, from a game mechanics or a design space point of view, that separating out the god-marked legions, as they kind of are in 10th edition, from how they all used to be all under one book, just muddies how Chaos Space Marines and Marks are just across the board, just like fundamentally. Like, you can't have you can't have a sense of parity or comparative value because you're dealing in different rulescapes essentially. Sorry, I'm just kind of working out my thoughts as we're going here.
I don't see a reason why you can't have your cake and eat it. You don't. Like, I think if you're writing a codex with the fans in mind and progression in mind, there is no reason why you can't work in, you know, the Renegade Legions who aren't Chaos aligned or less Chaos aligned into your Chaos Space Marine Codex.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if you want to do Space Marines, you could even have Renegade Space Marines in there and use Primara Space Marines. They would sell more Primara Space Marines, which is what they want to do. So I don't get, you know, I honestly think that you definitely could. I mean,
I think they could as well.
You know,
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I had this argument the other day with them phasing out Firstborn Marines because they want to sell Primaris. But what they don't seem to understand, the Games Workshop don't get their own setting. It's a war game based in a setting, which basically means if me and Maka, let's say, want to play a game from the Badab War, right? Well, in 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years' time, we can't. Unless we already have the models, we can't, because they won't sell Firstborn Marines anymore. Primaris Marines were not at the Badab War. If we want to play that game, we can't. We want to go back and play.
Fair point.
The Gothic War, and we want to start doing starship battles on the bridge of a starship with our Firstborn Marines. We can't. This is how divorced they are from the actual coolness of the setting. They're actually neutering a good 80 to 90. They're doing a Disney. They're neutering 80 to 90% of it. They want to sell the hot new thing. And the hot new thing, unlike Star Wars, the hot new thing in the Primara Space Marines, I think is pretty cool in the way it looks, right? It didn't need to be these are new Space Marines. It could have just been here's an armor upgrade that Cole's been working on. There you go, done, right?
Yep.
But I still see that you're cutting. You're not setting yourself free by not going back and taking advantage of the old law. You're actually neutering yourself, as for want of a better word. So, in response to your question, I think it's easy for them to do so. They won't, and they're not. Games Workshop aren't not double negative, aren't not doing this because it's difficult. No, this is a conscious decision where they're saying no. Night Lords aren't really a thing. Iron Warriors aren't really a thing. They're around. You can collect them if you really want to. But really, we want you to collect Black Legion or one of the other tentpole Chaos, Emperor's Children, this and that, Corn Berserkers. That's what we want you to do. At most, a Chaos Soup. At most. Even then they make it difficult. If you read the Chaos Space Marine rules, they make it difficult to take everything in the same list. It's very finicky. They want homogenized rules, ornaments, and unfortunately, Renegade Space Marines, non-Chaos aligned Chaos Space Marines don't fit the bill. They're just black sheep. They don't fit the bill. They're going to go the way of Firstborn Space Marines in the end. I think it'll be. I would say they will be brazen enough over the next few years to make it so the Chaos Space Marines is literally the tentpole people. They're not going to bring back Charabo, not going to anything like that. They'll be on the periphery, and you'll need to do conversions to get Iron Warriors. Do you know what I mean? You'll need to do conversions to get Night Lords. That's where it's going to go, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is that way already, right? Like, I don't foresee a need to bring back Primarchs other than the big four. I mean, well, maybe if it's just for the dollary dues and they know it'll sell. I guess it depends if they're hurting. Right? I think if alternate timeline, if 40K is not performing as they would prefer, I think they might dip into other Primarchs, right? But I think the plan A, like where we're on now, this track, is just the big four, each army, World Eaters is its own army from Chaos Space Marines, right? They're not Chaos Space Marines, they're World Eaters. They need to have their big centerpiece model, so Angron, right? And same with the other 4. And then, Chaos Space Marines has Abaddon and whatever else you want to throw in there. Whatever new side character comes out, you can just put them in Chaos Space Marines, right? Your Vashtors, your... whoever else.
Yeah.
They could have had... They could have had... Like, Demon Wargar, Demon Perturabo, very, very cool as far as Demon Princes go.
Oh, yeah.
Because Wargar is more like your traditional Chaos power armor, but with like a flaming demonic skull, almost like a Ghost Rider, with like an unholy light like shining out of his collar, illuminating his face and glowing, and like glowing runes over his skin. So that's a cool miniature just by default, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you can make there. And Perturabo, a fucking gigantic Terminator armored demon behemoth is just like oozing guns. As long as you don't go down the absurd orcish route of overgunning him, again, awesome, cool miniature idea, right? My worry for both of those two, though, is they won't be able to help themselves from covering them in like mutated fleshy bits instead of just letting the armor talk for itself, which is like key to both of those characters. That Wargar, his ascension is basically he doesn't change an awful lot. He's just more like a dark reflection of what he was. And Perturabo's case, he's just more of what he was, which is more armor, more guns. And the Iron Warriors hate mutations to the point that if they get a mutation, they cut the limb off and replace it with bionics. It's key to understanding these legions.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think the reason they don't write the rules anymore to beyond the sales point of separating the 4 marked gods out into their own books, which I think is frankly unnecessary, but beyond doing that, it's because they think that the average 40k player, I'm willing to say their opinion of them is pretty low. And, well, if you think about it from that perspective, they're probably saying, we don't trust you to be able to make this list to understand what you are doing when we're giving you the option to add points to your units with marks of... they don't even trust you to pick your own war gear anymore, let's be honest.
Well...
On your characters.
But everyone did, though. I don't think that's...
Everyone did, but again, the company is trying to chase that mythical wider audience. That they want to pretend that the game is just infinitely marketable, will infinitely grow, and all they have to do is make it more and more accessible. That's, it's like Hollywood. It's the same mentality, right? And please correct me if you think I'm off the page here, but I think it is just that simple. They are dumbing down the game because they don't want to write a game that is pleasing to existing fans. They want to write a game that is easy for fucking morons to pick up. That doesn't mean people are fucking morons who pick it up. What that means is that is their perception of them, that they want people who have just never played it before, not really cut out for playing these sort of games, maybe, who knows, right?
Yeah, they want like a super low skill floor, they
do not want it to be daunting in any way possible. They want the slowest person in the room to be able to literally just pick the game straight up and within 5 minutes be playing it. And unfortunately, their game is still way too convoluted for that. They just, for every one thing they improve, they always somehow manage to make a negative change somewhere else. If you want to have a game that can be picked up in 5 minutes by the average person off the street, I would suggest that's where your one-page rules style formats come in.
Agreed. Yeah, but I will totally agree with that. Love one-page rules. I think in part, so I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think it's probably a contributing factor because I also, and this is sort of my own perception of it. You guys can tell me if it's agreeable or not, but I get the impression that as Games Workshop, as let's say 40k has become more popular, become more of a competitive e-sport, dare I say T-sport, which makes me cringe, they've kind of found themselves in a position where they now have to manage rules in a way that they didn't really have to before. There's pressure put on them by this competitive audience, all these podcasters, independent tournament circuits, and the ones that Games Workshop themselves are integrated with, right? There's a whole lot of pressure. I get the sense that they have to take care of this rule set, right? They need to update it quarterly. They need to address errors within weeks, right, of things coming out. Whereas before, you would just never have, once it's printed, it's forever, right? Which is blessing and a curse. I think there's merits to both, and losses
they
to both.
used to do FAQs and updates to previous editions of the game. They were not the quickest.
Fair enough. But my point is, it's not as frequent as it is now, because I think there is greater pressure for 40K, because it's a competitive,
but I would say
activity, right?
I would say in that, though, they're their own worst enemy, because they do not, each edition, take what works and evolve it. Instead, they just try and radically alter it.
Correct.
They don't take a codex that works and then go, all right, these are the 5 or 6 things that didn't, let's just tweak those. They instead try and reinvent the wheel each time.
Yeah.
It'd be like if you bought a car and you go, this car seat's a bit uncomfortable. Better try a different car. So you can change the car seat.
Mm-hmm.
You could put a car seat cover on it. Maybe it was the car seat cover you had on it that made it uncomfortable. I mean, you bought the car in the first place, right? It's the same sort of thing with Games Workshop. We're seeing it now with Horus Heresy, with the likely 3rd edition on the horizon. We go, Heresy 1 was a good game, but they couldn't resist shaking it up dramatically for the 2nd edition. And there was no need at all to do so. The game has not, I think, grown in audience. I think it had that initial surge of hype, and now it's back to where it was. Because they created a flawed system, again, because they didn't take what works and just do it again, but just implement fixes. They took what existed, changed a bunch of shit, and then were left with a game that was once more needing fixes. And they do it every time. 9th edition did not fix 8th. 10th did not fix 9th. 11 won't fix 10th. Because they have this compulsive need, like I don't know whether it's like the Star Trek franchise, where it's like, oh, well, the legal team says that you've got to be 30% distinct to the previous Gene Roddenberry Star Trek because of licensing regulations. So, it's like, oh, well, the Enterprise needs a redesign, and, Spock's personality is this now, and the Klingons now look like fucking space orcs, right? And it's like that. It's like there's a mandate each edition update, like, oh, well, 10th has to be 30% different to 9th edition. It's like,
it needs to be
9th edition and remove all the bad mechanics out, and then you can keep the codexes more or less as they are. You can redo them for the edition, but you don't need to change an awful lot if you're not making radical changes to the rest of the game.
I agree with you.
And I think that's the problem. It's not that they can't make a balanced game for tournament play. It's that they choose to radically alter every time they do make a change.
Yeah, well, they have to create a spin, right? A unique selling point for the new edition. It has to be, get excited because we've changed things and it's newer and better, right? But they're the only company that does it. Yeah,
this is the problem, though. They're the only company that does it. You do not. If you play, I don't know, BattleTech has no problem selling miniatures. Very popular game. It's a good game. They're not completely reinventing the rules, so it plays like a completely different system every time they update the game. You can play with the same models now that you could in the 80s.
Beautiful.
They're not doing that with Bolt Action. They're not doing that with Flames of War. You don't play, they don't do it with, when they did X-Wing version 1, X-Wing version 2, Star Wars Legion, they don't go, all right, new edition of the game, and then completely change how everything works. Like, remember before how you had movement values? Guess what? We've removed that from the game. They don't do that. They keep what worked in the game, what people love about the system. They go, hey, the selling point is we're adding more stuff to the game system. You love more stuff, and the stuff that's there, we've fixed the things you didn't like. That's the selling point. Remember how, you had, let's pretend it was 40k there. For years there, scouts were just crappier versions of Marines. We've made them better now. They're worth taking this edition. You're like, oh, cool, awesome. Oh, remember this special rule? How it sucked? Guess what? We've rewritten that special rule. Now it actually makes sense. Oh, perfect. That's the selling point.
It should
But
be.
changing it should be, right? But Games Workshop has to do dramatic changes. Again, I think because they underestimate the audience. They think you're a bunch of idiots.
Can I jump off on that? Like, I think...
Yeah, please.
They do think that you're a bunch of morons. But at the same time, it's the taking away of wiggle room. That's what they're doing with modern rules. There is no wiggle room. I know, Mackie, showing us pictures of different things over the last few days, hobby related. Don't be getting that in your minds. Of old articles of let's make your own green stuff. Skitari. Let's do your own bits of. I remember the big green fort in White Dwarf once, where they had this big orc fort made from matchsticks. It was brilliant, and you could see that you could absolutely, on a very tight budget, express yourself in the hobby. That's no longer a thing. They don't want that. They don't want player expression. It doesn't sell. Quite simply, you can get things for player expression not from Games Workshop. That's not where the money is. The money is in creating a game that is easy to learn, hard to master, but also extremely frustrating when you're not getting it right, and you're not, when you're not totally invested. It can be very frustrating. If you know every codex, you're going to have a decent time in 10th edition, right? You'll be really in there. I had this conversation with a young lad on my own channel, 16-year-old lad. It comes out today, actually, on Friday, Hobby Nightmare. And he was saying, no, I think 10th edition's fine. I rules, you do all that. And I said, yeah, but your point falls down. Because you're 16 years old, you have all the time in the world to read every codex and completely negate all of your schooling by just being a full-time 40k player. But we don't. The vast majority of people on planet Earth doing 40k don't have that amount of time, and will be alienated by this kind of thing. And 40k these days is an exercise in narrowing down option, taking away expression. There's a very good reason why modular monopose kits are coming out, where you're taking away a lot of the war gear option, a lot of the pose option, different arms. Difference between the old Grey Knight kits and the new Primaris kits are bloody stark, right? You can create from the Blade Guard squad, right? You can create exactly the same squad in 2 or 3 different poses for each model. That's it. That's all you get, right? And even then, they're not very different. It's just how are the arms moving on the model? Everything else exactly the same, right?
Right.
No difference in weapons, really. No difference in, what one. I love the models. I think they're great, but they're a bits box for me. You buy them for bits for other models if you've got the money. All you need is one squad of Blade Guard. Get any more than that, they're all going to look the same, and they're all going to look pretty silly after a while, because you've got, the repeating models.
Yeah, you got copy paste effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it looks bad.
So, again, it's that dumbing down of it, taking away all the options, and unfortunately, Renegade Space Marines or non-Chaos aligned Chaos Space Marines don't fit that mold. They are armies that are very player driven in expression. They would demand that you have some sort of skill with converting armies. But I think that's a great shame. I think there should be advanced modeling armies in the setting, in the game, where you go, okay, you can do Renegade Space Marines, but to do them properly, you need to be able to cut into your models with a hobby knife. You need to be able to make green stuff, tabards and chains and things. You learn how to do that. That's great. That's what should be happening.
Yeah, I think that. I think that still exists. I mean, among the people who are passionate.
From Games Workshop
yes,
from the top.
100%.
That's what I mean.
It should be top down.
Exists.
Excellent point. Yeah.
It exists on YouTube. Absolutely. The YouTubers are really keeping that flame going. But in terms of the actual company itself, it's like it doesn't exist. It's not there.
Yeah, they don't want to indicate it or highlight it because it's not.
No, they don't want to put you in that direction because they want you to collect Primaris Space Marine.
Yeah.
But the reason why I think it's such a fucking stupid thing to do. Is come up with a blanket retarded statement like, we want every faction in Warhammer 40,000 to have a 45 to 50% win rate. Are you stupid? Like, are you? That's a ridiculous thing to say.
Yeah,
What you're basically saying is, I want everybody to be the same. Nobody to have any sort of power curve. Nobody to have any sort of expression. Everybody needs to be this grey fucking sludge that doesn't stand out from the rest. Don't upset anybody. Oh, sorry, upset people. It's fine. Everyone should be utterly broken and busted in their own way.
It's an unfortunate consequence of like this path that they're pursuing, right? The catering, and this is like where I begin to poo-poo on the competitive side of things, but that's what happens, right? Like, it's almost like fuck around, find out, but Games Workshop is just profiting, so they don't care, right? It's all
Yep.
they're all happy either way, right? But if you're gonna pursue like, yeah, let's make this a competitive war game, and then you need your factions to have all these outcomes because it's not about the narrative, or it's not about how bad the mortals are dealing with the grim darkness of the far future, right? It's about, oh, if this player is playing X, they need to have a comparable percentage outcome of win rates as player who's playing Y, right? And
That's it, yeah.
it just damages the narrative.
You should always avoid that in game design. Always. If you want to play X, you have to have... No, your game's failed.
Mm-hmm. And what's
Your
worse,
game's
North,
failed.
it's like only a few particular like builds are
Yeah.
of compositions of armies are what's creating those charts, right? So the vast majority of armies and combinations is just like not catered to, or the upkeep isn't there as well, right? Aside from what's terribly broken or what's terribly underperforming, and then those are the
It's
things.
the same sort of thing as have you ever bought a role-playing game book? And you open the first few pages, you'll always see that dreaded line. If you don't like any of these rules, then feel free to change them or ignore them at your leisure. The more guidelines. No, motherfucker. I've just paid £40 for this book. How about you write rules and I play the game? How about that? Give me the option to change them, yeah, but don't put it on the first page. What you're doing then is you're pussying out. You're telling me your rules aren't worth listening to. If you created a good game in the first place, you wouldn't need to put that at the start of your book. I paid good money for this book. There should be a game in this book that I can play verbatim straight away and be fine. Don't need to change anything. I'm not a game designer. Well, I am, but I'm not a game designer as a customer. You are. You've sold me a game. Games Workshop are exactly the same. Exactly the same with what they're trying to do with the hobby. They're giving over. It's the same kind of thing where they're giving over ownership to the fans in terms of, okay, secondaries, doing this, you're doing that. It's in the opposite direction. They're literally taking it in the opposite direction of, these are the rules that you need to be playing verbatim, and you don't get any sort of, shall we say, expression, right? If you want to do well at the tournament, there is one, maybe 1.5 Grey Knight lists you can take. That's it. And it's all the most boring models as well. It's like Terminators and Dread Knight. Well, be still my torn fucking gaping anus. Like literally some of the worst models in the range. Right, the boxes themselves, Grey Knight Terminator boxes, brilliant boxes for options. But like, in terms of what they look like compared to the Primaris Terminators, they look silly. They look like they're children. Like what are we doing? And that's my point. There's no expression. It's completely the opposite side of the role-playing game problem. There's too much expression. Just literally.
Right. Well, like I'm a little, like, I guess, wary to speak too like presumptuously around the competitive play and vibe and standards, because I don't keep up with what lists are performing and winning and in all those podcasts and websites. Like, I don't care for any of that shit, right? Not to berate anyone who is, like, everyone enjoys their hobby the way they want, whatever, different strokes, all that, right? But I don't want to assume too much. I can confirm, though, through the experience of others in my play group, that there is a fairly respectable hobby standard that I think is admirable, depending on the event that's required for competitive play, right? It's still, look, the hobby incentive and creativity still, like, could be better encouraged by Games Workshop from a top-down perspective, as we've been discussing, but I don't want to be bad faith and speak things that are, let's say, like misinform. I don't want to misinform about like competitive play standards or tournament organized event standards, let's say, because they do have fairly decent hobby standards in that respect. Like, I don't, speaking to some of the points we made earlier. Yeah, but things could certainly be more encouraged. Like when I'm looking through these old articles that Maka sent, where they're, this is before the AdMech had a range, the Mechanicus had a range, but they're showing you how to convert your guardsman into a Skitari. Is super cool. Super cool. Wish we get more of this.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, having your cake and eating it. There is no reason why you can't have your Adeptus Mechanicus full army, range there, but also be able to say, if you don't like our Skitari, here's a method of making some more muscular Skitari, some more human-looking Skitari, who maybe aren't as far down the line of becoming machines. As that would be, you could have everything. Mm-hmm. There is no reason why not. Like I get all my sins. I get and read White Dwarf. I consider it a business expense. Remain on top of what Games Workshop are doing. Because White Dwarf is their official mouthpiece. Let's be honest, that's what it is. So I get it every month, read it cover to cover. And I've not seen an article like that yet. Since I've been doing this for the past year. Like, I've not seen anything like that. There've been no conversion articles, no nothing. There's painting articles. Here's how you paint our official models. Without changing the poses. They're all exactly the same model.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you paint a skeleton, an Ossiarch Bone Reaper, right? Something like that. Cool model. Yeah, where's my expression? Where's my model? What? Games Workshop used to be a company that would say, "Hey man, see that imagination you've got? Come here, son. I'm going to teach you how to unlock that."
Our world, your hobby. Now it's our world, our strict definition.
Our
of
products.
hobby.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to add to that with the laws of the gods. So there are 3 different spell laws that I shared. 3.5 Codex had similar for psychic powers. Again, it's symptomatic of the era. Symptomatic? Symbolic? Maybe? Systematic? Who knows? Some sort of word that sounds right. But you have the law of Zinj, the law of Nurgle, and the law of Slaanesh, and they play very differently from one another. These spells are very different. Yes, you could loosely say that there are aggressive spells, there are defensive spells, and there are like summoning type spells. But what you have to roll on the dice and what the units are that might be created, say, from the summoning spells, are obviously going to be tailored to those gods. And they'll have a very different impact. And it's great because I remember like playing as Zinch and summoning like Flamers of Zinch or Horrors of Zinch in someone's flank in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. That's a game changer for a wizard's army to suddenly be pulling off flanking charges with units that weren't there a turn ago. It's like, boop, there you go. I just killed some of your units. Now they've turned into spawn. Now you're being flank charged by a unit made up the dead models from your unit. Like, such a cool thematic twist.
Yeah, I was just gonna gush about that because I love that shit. Okay, like turning enemies into chaos spawns and just it's those moments through game mechanics where we get the narrative to kind of come to life, right? Like, holy shit, that's where you turn my Astartes into a chaos spawn, right? Exactly. Yeah, same with chaos spoons, also good.
And that's also where, like, your stories with your friends or the people that you game with that, like, you bond over, that's where they originate. They don't bond over, like, oh, I was using Rabude Gilliman and I used a vital command point in turn 3. You're like, oh, you sure did. No, it's when you're like, oh, I was playing that dwarf player and I cast pink fire of Zinch on them, and then a bunch of them turn into horrors and countercharged into the side of his unit. But his dwarf Slayer Lord turned around and cut them all down. It was so fucking epic. Like, it's a totally different feel of the game, right? And one of them makes you want to play another game and see what crazy stuff is going to happen next time. The other is just like a depressing, to me, by the numbers, you know. And that's one of the beauties of the marks and what they represent and what they, when they're used correctly, right? And then you have, in addition to this, like in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the unmarked chaos, your regular sorcerers, they're pulling a whole bunch of spell wars from the basic spells in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, like War of Shadows, War of Metal, War of Fire. They're all sort of, you know, the wars that they would pull from. And that, again, adds a different dimension to it. 'Cause it could be like summoning a shadow demon using the Law of Shadows to attack your enemies. Oh, how cool is that? Like, it's a completely different thing. And okay, a Lord of Zinch in Warhammer Fantasy Battles back in 6th edition was going to be this amazing powerhouse, you know, because it's going to be the best combination of an insanely powerful warrior of chaos combined with the highest, most powerful wizard of equal to like high elves magic. And you're putting the two together, but you're paying so many points for it. So when that character inevitably casts that one spell too many and blows themselves up like they're working for ISIS, like, well, you know, whoops-a-doozy, that's on me, you know, and you can have a laugh about it, you know, because that was the sacrifice you made. Whereas the guy who took Chaos Undecided and just went the Law of Shadows and played it a lot more safe doesn't have that issue of, you know, spontaneous detonation of his horde. And just the way that your narrative evolves, just, oh, chef's kiss. Loved it. It's no coincidence that the man who wrote that book, Alessio Cavatore, writes Mantic's Kings of War now.
Interesting. Yep. Quite the decline. Just looking over the lores that you shared with me in chat, bringing them up in my OBS, so it gets captured in the video here. Yeah, there's some sweet stuff here.
It's so very different to what you get now. Now, even Psychic Powers just gets boiled down to like, yeah, one or two. It's not like a huge variety to pick from.
Oh, well, it's like, yeah.
Pigeonholed into it.
The Psychic Powers might be the most best example for
it's
decline
the most
in creativity.
mechanic,
yeah.
right?
Well, because right now, like in 10th, because you're definitely checked out, and I think North, if I recall correctly, doesn't have a toe in 10th edition, right? Like you stopped playing.
No, I mean I've played now 7 games.
Yeah, so yeah, 10th edition doesn't
one
have
piece
psychic powers or a psychic system. They're just abilities, and like at best you'll have to roll on a 2-up if your psychic power works or not, and then you resolve what it is.
Well, there's part of me that's okay with
yeah,
even as a Grey Knight player, saying, hey, you need this psychic phase, if you know.
There's trade-offs.
So let's for making that change. Even though it doesn't benefit my faction or my army, yeah, cool. I've got psychic powers. What if the other guy doesn't? You know, like he's going to sit there for 20 minutes while I tend to be a space wizard. No, let's keep the game on.
Yeah, I'm also not a fan of. Like I like dice as a means to abstract, you know, a certain amount of chance, but I kind of get. I don't know if this is. Something I differ from you guys on, but I kind of get annoyed when it's like, oh, I'm paying for something, but it's unreliable and it doesn't work, and it's not something like very flavorful, like some sort of weird orc bazooka that's like, you know, that's what it is. It's supposed to be like something kind of wacky, right? When I'm like an easy example is like let's say a stratagem that you pay for, and you use it when you die, and if you roll a 4+, you get back up and you fight again. I kind of don't like that design space at all.
No, I think
I kind of get frustrated. I'm like, well, why would I pay for this?
Isn't it? I think that this is a subject for another video, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely, it's a tangent.
But when we're I think that the lack of consequences in 40k now is appalling. Like, if you make a mistake, generals aren't really punished for mistakes. They're punished for not learning their opponent's codex. That's not.
I don't know how I feel about that.
You're
I have to
punished for
think
not
about it.
maximizing your advantages.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need to know your own codex from back to front, and you need to know what the other person's codex can do. You know, in mid-level play, I would say. You know, against the guy who knows what he's doing, you need to know what you're doing, what he's doing. Don't.
Yes, yeah. I think if you're gonna play something for the first time and you're like, I have no idea what this faction does. Generally speaking, you're probably just gonna lose if they know how your faction works, but you don't know how their faction
And by the way,
works.
that doesn't sound bad unless you've played it, and then you've gone and played something like one-page rules where, yeah, I don't know all the things your army does, but I've got an idea, right? So, your Eldar, so you're going to be very quick and you're going to hit very hard. So I've got a way around that. That knowledge, I can fight a good battle against Eldar, right?
Yeah,
Because
well,
I don't know what.
it might also just be just a fundamental, like a more fundamental design disparity between one-page rules. Just because I think the alternate activations really creates breathing room to give you agency. Whereas if I'm playing you in 40k and I'm having an off day, or maybe I'm new or whatever, and I just keep things out of position, you can really fuck my shit up. And in one turn, it's like, well, I think I'm going to be tabled next turn, right? This looks terrible.
Yeah.
And now I've lost so many pieces, I can't get you tit for tat, right? Whereas in one-page rules, it's alternate activations. So even if you're being outplayed, you're still going back and forth. You still feel like you're making an effort. You're making the best moves you feel you could make in the moment, right? So I almost don't want to be too hard on 40k, but look, older editions didn't have as bad of an issue in this regard, so maybe you still can and put some blame. But I think in part it's definitely a systematic issue as well. It doesn't make it easier, let's say. Right?
No, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm just looking in the background at those pictures I sent of just the conversions of like the white metals, and there's a Nurgle Warhammer Fantasy army. So not just the plague zombies, but there's a Warhammer Fantasy Nurgle army in there where they've used like parts from the old Warhammer Fantasy zombies on the Marauders of Nurgle to make them feel like they're rotting away. Again, you'll note the distinct lack of tentacle and coral reefs growing out of the miniatures, because that was never Nurgle's thing. They were the rotting army, not the mutated Zinch army. It's just random tentacles and stuff. And I just, I was saying at the very start of the episode, I think might have just started recording, that like these are the sort of thing where I would look at and I go, I just want to build that army now because I'm inspired looking at that. I never cared for the Mark of Nurgle until I saw this, and I saw the way that they utilize bits, and it suddenly feels more real and less one-dimensional, because one-dimensional is just taking Chaos Marauders and painting them green, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking something out of the box and just building it as is. That's perfectly acceptable as a starting point in any hobby, but there's only so long you can do that before you get bored of it. For me personally, and seeing these armies where they're like, okay, let's not just paint them a certain way, let's make them feel a certain way. There's no gain to be had on the tabletop. It's only, the warm feeling it brings to the cockles of your heart. Or, if you're playing at an event, maybe you'll get vote for best painted or something, player's choice, this kind of thing.
Yeah,
there's
it's
no pressure
pure
on you to
passion.
do it.
Yeah.
But it's lovely to do, and just it, this is the stuff that I love in the hobby, seeing that, because I get hounded all the time. Like, if you hate it so much, why do you still play it? It's like, I don't hate it. I love it. I hate the direction that a greedy corporation takes it in, where they think that we're a bunch of simpletons who can't run with a complex rule set. What we want is a complex rule set. We do at heart. We just want it to be a tight rule set. that's well written.
Yes,
It doesn't
yeah.
need to be perfectly balanced. I mean, you're never going to achieve it anyway. It just needs a semblance of good balance where there's no obvious, like, well, how did that slip through? People can endlessly forgive minor mistakes and imbalances. What people don't tolerate, and this is the thing I think is missed when people say things like, oh, you're never satisfied with things, like just in general. It's like, no, people, like the majority of people will be satisfied if you do a good job of writing something. And if there's minor flaws, minor spelling mistakes, no one will care. It's when it's like page after page after page of issues, and the FAQ is, a dozen pages long for a book that's come out that week. You're like, how did this get to the point of printing it if it's got this many issues? If an FAQ came out and had just two things wrong with it, and people will agree, like, yeah, there are really only two things wrong with this book, then that would be, in my mind, the perfect codex. But that's not the sort of thing that we get anymore, unfortunately. They take dimension away, they take options away, they replace it with just vanilla paste of options. Just, these are the things you can arm your character with. Use only these because this is the only things we arm the model with in the plastic box that you have bought. And on top of that, we're not going to give you rules that sort of, I won't say convince you, but sort of push you in the direction of customization. That is a bad thing. So we're not going to include that, because the dum-dums won't understand what you're doing if you change the power axe on that character to a thunder hammer instead, that character can't actually take. That's going to confuse the dum-dum across the table from you. So we're not allowing that. I think that there is probably the true decline, sort of, to finish up my points for the video.
I get what you're saying. I don't know. I still feel like it's not wrong. I think it's part. I think there's definitely an element of wanting to simplify to make it more accessible, but I also feel there's an incentive when you have to update rules ever more frequently for this competitive beast that you've kind of like manifested. I think
If
it
it's-
behooves you to just have a simpler thing to update. Also, you know what I mean? I
Are the
think it's
rules
both.
Really, are the rules that much more accessible? Because the game, even with those rules, has been growing and growing and growing. Despite the rules, despite the price rises, it's been growing organically for a long time. It isn't popular because of Primaris Marines. Primaris Marines just represent a bit of a renaissance in 40k because they just dramatically shook the tree for 1 second, where they went, Primarchs are back, Primaris are in.
Right.
Nothing else has really changed in the setting, right? And it didn't just pull new people in because Primaris is so much cooler than regular Space Marines.
No, Space Marines are cool, have always been cool.
Yeah, they've always been cool. But you've got so much cross media. You've got popular celebrities like Henry Cavill getting in on the action. There's so many video games and mobile games out there. Like, all of it together is having an impact simultaneously. And you could, if Games Workshop just re-released 3rd edition in all but name for 11th edition 40k, I doubt there would be a drop in popularity, honestly. I doubt there would be a big drop in popularity. I think it would just continue on much the same.
No, I think so too. And then we'd
Because-
have all the options we want, right? My only point is I think there's a correlation, unless I'm mistaken, where as Games Workshop has more frequently updated rules and points and that sort of thing for game balance, it seems to line up with their more simpler template of game system with less war gear options, right? And less unit options, right? You can't just add one guy to your squad. You have to add them in groups of 5, right? So it's nice and easy to calculate, right? Like that sort of, those design sensibilities seem to correlate with the frequency of
and
updates.
no better for it.
Oh yeah.
All they've done is, and then the thing is, they've still not pleased the tournament players. So they've ripped all the narrative away for the narrative players, and they've not pleased the tournament players anyway. So what is the lesson in this?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't
North? 'Cause I know you need to finish up soon. Do you have a lesson in all of that?
No, because you can't please everybody, but there is a power in knowing that you can't do that and doing your own thing anyway. Like, The problem is that you need a vision of your own, and this is what we're saying. We're not saying like, please everybody. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is it's okay not to please everybody if you have a cohesive vision that you're going towards. Fine. Your cohesive vision, and this is why I thank Games Workshop for doing this. Actually, their cohesive vision shows me that they've looked at video games, they've looked at the success and the money that they bring in terms of DLC and things like that, and they've gone, that's the mode we want to go down. We want to make sure that we've got an esport here, we've got something that people get invested in and getting better in, and it's a self-perpetuating economy that we can do. Because at the moment, we're not sustainable, and they know that. They're not stupid, right? They set their own ridiculous prices for their models, and unless those models have an inherent value beyond, doing models, they don't have value, right? So they're creating an esport. They're creating an addict's echo chamber where people want to get better at this game. They go to their first tournament. Maybe they get 1 win out of 3, and they think, well, I did win at a tournament, and that gets them in. That's the way that they're going. And I thank them for doing that, because it means I can say this isn't for me, and I can go, right, I'm going to go over here to one-page rules, and that's between y'all. Have fun, right? So I thank them for doing that. But at the same time, you need a solid vision to be able to say this is where we're going, and right now I think Games Workshop have pulled off the gas a little bit, and they're just sitting there on this treasure trove of lore, of rules, models, and not really pushing it forwards anywhere because they're just afraid to. They're afraid to upset people. They have money paralysis. They're like, well, we might lose some money doing this, so we're not going to do that. But if you don't do anything and you stick to this, every edition gets new codexes, and the new codexes are out of date within 2 minutes of even being printed. And not even every faction will get a new codex. Sorry, sucks to be you. See you next year. See you in 5 years. They stick to this model, it's going to die because people, especially wargamers, can be very frugal people. Ironically, they can be people who know what to do with their money. Don't give them a reason for doing it, and your reason is, let's go to a tournament. Not sustainable, in my opinion. So that's my final takeaway. Anyway, I know we branched off from, Chaos Space Marine.
No, we've been all over the map, and it's I welcome it. It's not an issue for me. Hopefully, the listeners enjoyed the natural pathfinding we went on in this conversation. But does that feel like a good endpoint? You guys want to wrap up there?
Sure. Oh, I've got to go get my kid.
Yeah.
Excellent. Do you guys have anything you wish to plug? Anything on the horizon, channel-wise, or?
General hobby nightmares. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then more 40k rants on Tuesday and Thursday. So five videos a week from yours truly. So over to Northern Exile if you want to get involved in that. Apart from that, no, not really. Oh, I do a live stream every Sunday where we rebuild the 40k universe as our own thing, which is going pretty well at the moment, actually. Some really cool stories coming up. So, yeah, that's cool.
Nice. Anything over on the outer circle, Maka?
No, nothing in particular. I'm just sort of... My crystal ball broke for the first time in forever today. I actually got a prediction wrong. I thought that they were going to release a Cameron Diaz for the horror. Sorry, Imperial Fist character Camber Diaz. So Cameron Diaz. Thought they were going to release them for the Horus Heresy. Instead, they released 2 pointless knights in epic scale for Legions Imperialis. Because that's considered the same game system for the purpose of release days and roadmaps. So, I think we should start treating the other game systems like that. 40k from now on. Necromunda releases and releases for anything like that. Yeah, that's a 40k release. Age of Sigmar, well, that's obviously Warcry and Underworlds as well. They can all share the same roadmap. No, what a fucking stupid release.
Yeah.
Of all the things they could make in plastic, they haven't even got Jagged Icon on a fucking jet bike yet. They're releasing Mechanicum Knights in plastic, just in 8mm scale. What the fuck? This company, man. This company. Just one is a license to print money. If they sell triple digits, if they can break into 4 digits of sales for those nights worldwide, I'll be shocked. But I can guarantee you 1,000 people would easily buy Jagged Eye Khan on a jet bike.
Oh yeah. Well, you're talking about something people have years worth of attachment to through the narrative, right? And beyond.
Yeah. So no, everything's fine and peachy in my world. Thanks for asking.
No worries. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next Grimdark Therapy.
Bye. See you guys.
See ya.